When John Frusciante rejoined the Red Hot Chili Peppers in the late 90s for what became the Californication era, there was one amplifier in particular that he used in the studio and on the following tour that I truly believe is responsible for some of the best tones he's ever had and some of his best songs that they ever wrote, of course being off of Californication. The tones from this amplifier are just absolutely gorgeous, and it's one that, although we don't have a lot of information on in today's video, I wanted to gather it all and, package it up nicely for you guys in one concise video. And of course, we are talking about John Frusciante's black panel Fender Showman from the 1960s. This is just an incredible amplifier, and today we're going to discuss it and all the details we know about how John Frusciante used it. So John Frusciante's Fender Showman is a black panel, black Tolex version of the amplifier, and Fender produced them from 1964 until 1968. So in those 4 years of production, that is when John Frusciante's Fender Showman is from. And it's an 85 watt amplifier, so this amp has plenty of headroom and power and will keep up, more than fine with John Frusciante's Silver Jubilee and the Marshall Major on tour. And that's exactly what he did. In the studio for Californication as well as the Californication Era tours, John used the Fender Showman live. But before we get into the live context and some live clips of John Frusciante using the Fender Showman from the Californication era, there was a really great interview from Guitar Player from 1999 that John Frusciante discussed his rig and especially the Fender Showman that we're going to discuss here, and I'm going to read part of the interview for you guys now. So this first part here is him discussing the gear that was used on Other Side. So that was a 55 Gretsch White Falcon through the Showman and a Marshall 412 cabinet. He later goes on to say that for the breakdown section, he used a 61 Gibson SG Custom into a cranked JCM 800, kind of doing an Eddie Van Halen inspired rig there, which is really cool to see him kind of channeling his inner Eddie Van Halen in terms of a rig, at least in the studio. Now, when he talks about Scar Tissue, he says, that was my 55 Strat, that's the one with the maple neck. Most of the basic tracks were recorded with that guitar. I believe I ran it through the Showman because the Marshall just was not clean enough. And that part is really key. Him mentioning that the Marshalls that he was using in the studio just were not clean enough for the tone that he was looking for Scar Tissue. And this makes a lot of sense. Even when you just listen to Californication, Scar Tissue overall just has a bit of a different tone to it than all of the other songs pretty much on the album, save for the main bits of Other Side, of course. And that's because John is using this Fender Showman amplifier. And it really goes to show just how he was thinking at the time in terms of recording this album, where instead of just relying on his main Marshall sounds, he was like, no, you know what, these songs really need to be a lot cleaner and I'm looking for something else. And an 85 watt Fender amp from the 60s is is really just the perfect choice for John to use for these two songs, especially Scar Tissue. The last thing I think I should mention in regards to the Fender Showman's use in the studio during the recording sessions of Californication is the title track itself. Now, Californication, the tone that John got for that song is another one of those extra clean sounds that is a bit different compared to the rest of the album. When you group Scar Tissue, Other Side, Californication fits right along with it. Now, I read, again, this whole magazine, which is the magazine that I quoted from John Frusciante talking about the Fender Showman in the studio before. I looked online through other interviews he did around this time as well for the recording sessions of Californication and could not find any concrete evidence that the Fender Showman is the amp he used in the studio. But as we're just going to talk about in a moment here, John's live use of the Fender Showman, of course, he would use the Gretsch White Falcon for Other Side as well as Californication, and to me, that kind of helps me lean towards the belief that the Fender Showman is what he used to record Californication. Of course, without John Frusciante confirming directly that that is the amplifier he used for Californication, we can't 100% for certain say that that is what he used, but I think it's more than likely that that's the amplifier, again, based on just the overall tone of that song, knowing that that Fender amp was taking on those extra clean tones for that album, and then plus again the fact that he used that amplifier live for that song as well as of course Other Side. I think it's definitely more than likely, and I just wanted to touch on that before we get into the live context. So with how John Frusciante used his Fender Showman in a studio context covered, it's now time to discuss a little bit deeper into how he used it in a live context. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with John Frusciante's amp rigs, especially during the By the Way and Stadium-Arcadium eras, which are a lot more heavily documented, you will know that the main Silver Jubilee and Marshall Major were the two amps that were running for predominantly 95% of the time for the show. Those were all of his main Strat and Telecaster sounds were ran through those two amplifiers running together. Now, the second Silver Jubilee was used for the Gretsch White Falcon as well as the Les Paul Custom that John Frusciante would use during the Stadium-Arcadium era, and this was a totally separate rig. But John actually used the Fender Showman live in that kind of separate amp slot for the Gretsch White Falcon's songs. And if you've seen any Red Hot Chili Peppers performances, if you've watched any of them from 1999 or 2000, and you actually look at the Fender amplifier in John's rig, odds are you've probably been able to pick out one detail that just doesn't line up with a black panel Fender amplifier. And it's the white piping around the grill cloth on the front of the amplifier. And this actually means that John isn't using his black panel Showman. He's using a Silverface dual Showman live. Now, what's really interesting, number one, is that he just decided to switch amplifiers that he'd actually use live, going from the earlier version of the Showman from 1964 to about 1968, and instead choosing to move to the dual Showman that was produced from 1968 to 1970 in the Silverface format. And I'm no expert on the differences between black panel and silver panel amplifiers, but essentially the gist of it is that silver panel Fenders, generally have more headroom than their black panel counterparts, and at times Fender would just change the cosmetics of the amplifier first before actually introducing circuit changes, and at other times, as far as I'm aware, they actually would introduce these circuit changes first and then change the cosmetic look of the amplifier later on. So it's safe to say that while John's Fender Showman, the silver panel version, is going to be a bit different circuit-wise from the black panel Fender Showman, they are extremely similar amplifiers. They're both 85 watts, and the Silverface, let's pretty much just say that it has a little bit more headroom to it. And I think this is why he actually swapped amplifiers, the type of Showman, from the regular black panel Fender Showman from the 1964, 1968 to using the later silver panel version live, because it has a little bit more headroom to it, and it will keep up clean sound-wise, at least, when he's swapping between that as the standalone amp rig for the Gretsch White Falcon, then moving back to his main amp rig of the Marshall Major and Marshall Silver Jubilee. Now, I have been referring to John's silver panel Fender Showman as a dual Showman, and this is mainly just due to some educational guesswork here. We know that John Frusciante relies on one single cabinet live that he's actually mic'd and using just in his live context. Now, the regular Fender Showman has an 8 ohm output transformer, and the dual Showman has a 4 ohm output transformer. And this would make sense in John using the 4 ohm dual Showman to match with the 1960 A or B 8 ohm Marshall cabinets. They're also 16 ohms as well, but obviously he just used 4 ohms into a 4 ohm cabinet. Now, there's one part here where he could have been using the regular Showman, is that the 8 ohms split between both cabinets, and if he was running both Marshall full stacks, the whole full stack live. Could be a regular Showman, but I'm pretty confident that it's a dual Showman that we're looking for. But either way, that's the main difference between the two amplifiers here. But I just wanted to kind of clarify that thought process out for you guys. Now, if you find yourself at the end of this video having a bit of gear acquisition syndrome and wanting a Fender Showman amplifier, you're probably asking yourself, okay, well, which one do I get for the John Frusciante sound from that era? Do I go for a black panel Fender Showman, or do I go for the Silverface version of the amplifiers? And at that point, whether you want to go with the regular Showman or the dual Showman, that's kind of up to you and what kind of cap system you want to run mainly. And my best advice to you guys is, obviously just pick whatever sound you'd rather try and recreate, or whatever sound you prefer. Do you prefer the live context that the amp is used in? Watch some, more YouTube videos of them performing from that era. Do you really like how that amplifier sounds in the Silverface version live? Or really, is the studio thing kind of more your thing? Personally, I would lean towards the black panel Fender amplifiers, the 1964 to 1968 versions. I love I think it's a 66 Bandmaster that I have. It sounds absolutely incredible, and some of these amplifiers, especially the black panel ones without reverb, are actually still very affordable, and it's just really cool to have an early Fender amplifier like that as part of your collection and kind of amp arsenal. So I would personally lean towards the amplifier he used in the studio, which is the black panel version. The studio sounds, for me, are really where that amplifier shines and has really made the biggest impact on John Frusciante's tone, because you always go back and listen to the record, right? I don't really find myself going back, at least in watching a ton of footage of the Chili Peppers live from the Californication era just to listen to. I'll do that for the By the Way era or Stadium Arcadium, but not Californication. But the studio record is what I always go back and listen to, and that's just what I would do. If you guys want, my opinion as what might be the more impactful version, at least, I definitely would say the black panel is, but obviously depends on which one you're looking for and what sound you kind of favor and want to maybe try and recreate. But there you guys go. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I was just thinking the other day, it's really cool John Frusciante was using an old Fender amplifier as part of his amp rig, because besides that amp, it's really been just Marshalls straight up. You have the 2203 JMP now, obviously, that he's using and really favoring, honestly, compared to the Silver Jubilee, which is a whole nother topic that I'll discuss on the channel at a later date here. But I really just wanted to touch on it because I absolutely love Scar Tissue, especially off of the record. I think that clean sound is absolutely beautiful. And again, it's just a different sound from John using his Strat into that Fender amplifier. A Fender guitar into a Fender amp is truly just a magical combination, and the proof is in just how great Scar Tissue sounds. So you guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below as well as to your thoughts on this amplifier. If you do prefer perhaps the Silverface, silver panel tone from the live footage we have, or do you just prefer the straight up studio recording with the black panel version? Let me know in the comments down below, and please, you guys, subscribe to the channel if you are loving this John Frusciante content. I really do appreciate the support. And until the next one, you guys, take care, and we'll see you soon.